And for this course, I will be giving 2 lectures. One is today, I will talk about inequality and health. In this lecture, I will use job stress as an example. And then next lecture, I will talk about occupational health problem in Taiwan, and as well as from a more international perspective. So this is just to tell you what I'm going to do today and next lecture. So for today, I will give about 40 minutes lecture to talk about why we are concerned about health inequalities, and to understand why we are concerned of it. We probably need to have a brief review of the development of public health. And then I will show you some example of the evidence of health inequality and also the trend. And then what are the causes of inequality in health? And what are the explanations being offered? So I will use job stress as an example, as you may know that the problem of overwork is very severe in Taiwan. And then I will talk about different types of causal explanations in terms of to explain the inequality in health. So the homework would be a group work, and I heard that there are 10 groups in this class, right? There are 10 groups, right? Okay, and so each group will have to submit 1-page summary. So it will not be very long, just 1 page. And each group will have to select a representative to give the oral presentation. You don't need to make a fancy slides. You just have to come up and talk next week at the beginning of the class. And so please choose one type of health problem and answer the following questions. So number 1, probably the first 2 groups, please choose occupational injury or occupational disease as your example, and then answer that in your country or in your region, do you think there's health inequality for this disease? What I mean by health inequality is that the uneven distribution of that disease according to social categories. For example, that some injuries may occur more frequently in working class. And so can you find some evidence showing that there is inequality in that health problem? And if so, what might be the causes? And if you have identified the causes, what kind of health policies or public policies do we need to reduce social inequality of that? So here, public policies, I mean domestic policies. So in your country, like for example in Taiwan, we have observed a very uneven distribution of occupational injuries. A lot of injuries occurred in construction workers. And what are the causes? The problem of like employment type or temporary job employment status might be the cause. Or we have found that people who are injured at work do not get enough benefit, and they end up being unemployed or end up being very poor and have poor health. So we would suggest some social security programs to help those who are injured. So that's what I mean by public policies. So this is just an example. So I mean that in your country, whether you can think of some domestic policies to address the health inequality problems. And if we want to promote or want to advocate some policies, what kind of obstacles you may expect? Who will oppose your agenda and who will support it? So please answer these questions. So is that clear? The slide is on SIBA, so okay, so you can download it. This is on the last page of the PowerPoint file. So other question? So please think about domestic problem. And next lecture, I will talk about the limitation of domestic health policy because of globalization. So many companies move out, and many immigrants move in. So things will become more complicated. It's very difficult to really tackle the problem of globalization. But here, for this lecture and for this homework assignment, I will ask students to think of domestic health policies that may be used to reduce social inequality. Okay. So other question? Okay. Then I will spend about 40 minutes, not very long, to give an introduction about health inequality in health. Okay. So because I know that many students here may not be aware of what public health really means, so here is just a brief summary. Public health is the science and art of preventing disease, prolonging life, and promoting health through organized effort of society. And what we mean by organized efforts, usually very often it comes with public policies. And the goal is to improve biological, physical, and mental well-being of all members of the society. So in School of Public Health, we have some courses we consider as core, including biostatistics, epidemiology, which is the study of the distribution of health problems and also to identify the causes. And then we need some training in basic health sciences. And there are 3 branches in our training. The first branch emphasizes on biomedical science. And the second branch focuses on environmental and occupational health issues. And then the third branch, which I belong to, focus more on the policy and management side. So if we look back at the development of public health, we will find that before the 20th century, or more precisely, before the discovery of bacteria, when people think of the causality, what are the causes of disease? There are 3 major types of thinking. So one is called the contagion theory. Based on this theory, people believe that diseases are caused by the direct contact or indirect contact with the infected people. So, and then the second theory held that diseases are caused by the dirty environment, especially the bad smell, the odor, or the poor air circulation. And the third argument are that people thought that diseases are the product of the exploitative social relationships. So these 3 types of the thinkings are the major thinkings before the discovery of bacteria. So according to these 3 types of thinkings, what kind of intervention policies may develop? So if you believe that the diseases are caused by contact with the infected people, what would you do? Burn that. Burn the infected materials or corpse. Okay. And what else? If you cannot burn it, what can you do?
separated from healthy people.
Okay, yes. So that's the so-called quarantine. So we separate the sick from the healthy. Okay. So if you believe that the second theory, if you believe that the diseases are caused by miasma, which means bad smell or the dirty environment, what would you do for prevention? So it's very easy. So if you believe that the miasma, which means bad smell and dirty water, dirty air, perfume, okay, make a better smell, and what else? Hygienic, clean up the environment. It improve the air quality, improve the environment. Yes, and for the third type of thinking, if you believe that diseases are caused by exploitative relationship, then what would you do? Because workers are being exploited, so they have the poor health. And what would you come up as a policy? Quarantine? No. Social production of health means that the social relationships is the cause of poor health. So like in the 19th centuries, during the time of rapid industrialization, there are many poor workers who do not have enough food to eat, or their wages was too low. And a lot of people, a lot of revolutionists thought that the problem was related to the economic systems. So what would you do? Social welfare. Yes. So very good. Okay. So these three major types of theories were the dominant theories in 19th century. But after the discovery of bacteria, all these three types of thinkings were replaced. So it entered another era we call the era of germ theory. Okay, so this slide was made by my colleague, Professor Tony Zhang. So the first part of the slide shows the major health discourse, the major health documents in the history of public health. So in the 19th centuries, before the discovery of bacteria, there was an act. This is the first act with the name of public health. It is the 1848 UK Public Health Act. So I will explain a little bit more about this act. This act is basically based on the miasma theory. So the content of the policies were to clean up the environment, especially the water system, the sewage systems, the drinking water system, and also to clean up the waste from human and from animal. And then bacteria was found in mid-1990s, and the germ theory was confirmed in 1884 by Koch, the German scientist. And then germ theory was further confirmed in the when penicillin was discovered in 1928. So this development marked as the beginning of germ theory. Okay, so if you believe that diseases are caused by bacteria, what would you do? You probably won't waste time cleaning up the environment. You probably will be less concerned about social welfare. And you probably won't bother separating the sick from the healthy. So what would you do? So bacteria are the major cause. And then so your public health emphasis will be on the gym, right? So that marked a very dramatic turn in the history of public health. And then after the World War II, WHO, World Health Organization, was established in 1948, and people started to talk about human rights. So health was considered as a part of the human right. So before that, do people think about human rights when they are trying to improve population health? What would be the main purpose of improving health of a population in early time? It's mainly for political stability, and but less concerned about human rights. Okay. Then when we enter after the mid 1990s, the disease patterns change from infectious disease to chronic disease, like cancer, heart disease, etc. And the report published by a Surgeon General of the U.S. Was also an important document which emphasized on the lifestyle perspective of health. So this report emphasized that lifestyle like smoking, lack of exercise were the causes of diseases. And 1974, the Langlade report, this is a Canadian report, which also emphasizes the lifestyle aspect of health. And then in 1978, the Alma-Ata declarations emphasized universal health care. So starting from then, people think that the universal care is important. And then Ottawa Charter, which emphasized the importance of social environment, especially the involvement of from the grassroots communities improvement. Okay. And then starting from 2005, the WHO established a commission of social determinant of health, and then we are more and more people are interested in social determinant of health. And the second half of the slide summarized the development of healthcare systems. So as you can see that Germany is the pioneer in terms of the social welfare system. Germany was the first country which established the universal compulsory social insurance for medical care. Okay. So I will just jump through this slide. So this is Public Health Act, which is based on the Miles-Mark theory, emphasized on drainage system. And then Bismarck, who is the prime minister of Germany in 19th century, who established many social security programs, including health, medical system, and also worker compensation system, and old age pension system, etc. So these systems were also considered as the infrastructure of public health system. And then we enter the 20th century, and germ theory became the most predominant theory in causation. Okay. And so germ theory has been a predominant theory. So according to theory, if you want to prevent disease, then you will have to improve the biological environment, not only outside but also inside. So in the 20th century, in the early part of 20th century, a lot of people believe that we can change the biological environment, not only the external environment, but also internal environment by using some eugenic intervention like birth control, marriage regulation, sterilization, and immigrant restriction policies. And this is the cover of the document I mentioned, Langlade report, published in 1974. This is the beginning of the emphasis on lifestyle. Okay, and there has been a lot of discussion about the contribution of medicines in terms of the improvement of population health. So this slide, the author is Thomas McCune, who was a medical historian, and he tried to emphasize that the importance of social environment. So he documented many information, he collect data and try to prove that, for example, the example shown on this slide shows that the rapid decline in tuberculosis mortality occurred before the gene was identified and before the effective therapies was introduced. So he tried to argue that the improvement of social environment, including improving nutritional status, improving sanitary conditions, were the causes contributing to the rapid decline in tuberculosis mortality. So you can see that there have been many different emphases in the history of public health. At the beginning, people are more concerned about the miasma, the environment, and some people emphasize on the social relationship. And then during the long period of time in the first half of the 20th centuries, people relied on biological science for public health intervention. But now we are started to concern about the social determinant of health, and what are the driving forces for such a concern. We know that there's a long history of concept of social influence on health, and in recent decades we have observed the rapid the widening social inequality in many aspects, in wealth, in income, in employment conditions, and also in health. So the widening social inequality has been observed not only in Taiwan but in many places. So people are concerned about that. And then there are changes in scientific knowledge on causalities. Now we understand that the diseases are causes not only from the biological factors or environmental factors, but also by psychosocial factors. And more and more people from other disciplines join public health, which also altered our scientific knowledge in our field. Okay, so there has been a long existing debate concerned that what contribute to the population health and inequality in health? What are the causes? And some people focus on healthcare systems. Some people focus on biomedical factors, and some on genetic factors, and some emphasize on lifestyle, the improvement of lifestyle, and some emphasize on the environmental pollution and environmental factors. And also social factors become the important issues to be concerned. So in in this lecture and in the homework exercise, I will encourage students to think of what are the social factors for health inequality, and what kind of social policy you may propose to reduce such inequality. Okay. So thinking in causality theory is closely related to health policy. So, okay. Then for the following few slides, I will show you some examples of the health inequality. So when we talk about health inequalities, first of all, we have to have some health indicators. So you can use life expectancy, or you can use mortality, morbidity, disease survival rate, or other health-related quality of life indicators. And then we also need measures for social conditions. So what kind of social factors we can use? We can examine distribution of health by social class, social economic status, such as income level, education level, type of occupation, or we can examine distribution of health by gender, or place, neighborhood, community, or the racial or ethnic group. Or we can also examine the different health status by the health system. For example, some people might be covered by different type of social security system, and they may have the different level of health. Okay, then politics or cultural or the trade policy may also have a very profound influence on people's health. Okay, so just to give you some example, so this is a very famous study called Whitehall study, which is a cohort study established by some British researchers, and they have documented the gradient, health gradient by employment grade. So as you can see that poor health were more prevalent among those who at the lowest employment grade. And also health behaviors, poor behaviors were also more often in people at the lowest employment grade. So what are the causes? What are the problems with that? We can think about that. And also when we watch the film, you may be able to find some answer about the causes. And also some biological futures of individuals are also correlated with their social position. So here you see that the people at the higher employment grade tend to be higher and less obese and have the lower blood pressure. So this pattern, this kind of, we call it gradient, health gradient, can be observed in many places. Also in the Taiwanese population, we also observed a similar health gradient. People who had a better social position tend to have better health. And this is a study from the United States. It shows that people who have experienced poverty accumulatively will have the poor health, psychological, cognitive, and social functioning. So, and then in UK, they collect people's occupational status on their death certificate. So the British researchers had been able to use their official statistics to document the inequality in many kind of many type of the deaths of disease. So in this slide, this is using the suicide as the example. We can see that the suicide rate was much higher among those who are at the lowest employment grade. And the inequality, the pattern of inequality, seems to be widened with time. So the later time period, we observed the widening of inequality in terms of the suicide mortality. So just to remind you that similar findings have been observed in many places. And in Taiwan, we had about 3% of the population were Aboriginal groups, and they historically they have been experienced a lot of hardship, and their health outcomes has been much worse compared to the Han Chinese. So you can see that the life expectancy of Aboriginal groups were very low in 1930s, only 9.8 years old for men and 13.5 years old for women. It's very, very low. And even until now, until the most recent data shows that there's some disparity in terms of life expectancy between Aboriginal group and Han Chinese. Okay, so this map shows that some areas have the high mortality. The mountainous region, the eastern coast, have the higher mortality. So this is another example showing that health inequality by region. Okay. So people at the lower socioeconomic position have the poor health. What are the explanations for that? So there are two major types of explanation. One is called the social selection, another one is social causation. So according to social selection, people with poor health were selected into poor socioeconomic position. So and then there are two subtypes under this umbrella. The social heritage theory held that people with poor health, they are unhealthy because they inherited poor health or poor socioeconomic conditions from their parents. And the social drifting theory held that people were in poor socioeconomic condition because they are unhealthy, so they are drifted into the poor condition. For example, people who have the mental problem may have difficulty finding a good job, and then was drifted to a poor job category or even unemployed. And another type of the explanation is called social causation. According to this theory, people become unhealthy because they are exposed to the unhealthy environment. So that's what we emphasize, because if we can show that the environment, the social environment, was the cause for people's poor health, then we should target on the environmental problems. Here we say environment, we mean that the social environment. Okay. So there are two types of pathway. One is material pathway. People are exposed to some hazard in their environment, either the physical hazard or the other hazard we call, or lack of resources. And another pathway is called psychosocial pathways. People are in the unhealthy environment may have developed stress syndrome, and they may have more likely to have negative emotion, and they have the poor coping behavior, etc. Okay. So why we are more and more people are concerned about social inequality, because that shown in many countries that like Gini coefficient is the indicator for the inequality in wealth, in income. In Taiwan, this is a slide for Taiwan, we have observed a rapid increase in income inequality. And also around the world, we can see that many places have the very high income inequality problem. You can see that like in Southern Africa, the income inequality is very high. And also some countries in Southern America, and then United States and China, and also Hong Kong. And we do not have data for Taiwan. Do you know the reason? Because we are not the member of the UN. Okay. And countries in Scandinavian peninsula have the highest is considered much better in terms of their income distribution. Okay. So for the second part of my lecture, I will use the focus of my research, job stress problem, to illustrate that what could be the social determinants of this problem. So because you all live in Taiwan now, you must have observed that the Taiwanese workers work very long hours. And then if you read the local newspapers, you will find that the problem of karoshi, have you ever heard of it? 过劳死, sudden death from overwork, has become the very, very controversial issues nowadays. And do you know May 1st is the Labor Day? So every year there are march for workers' rights. And in recent few years, karoshi has become important issues in the Labor Day march. Okay. These kind of cases have occurred very frequently in recent years. And most cases were young and middle-aged men, and who have the cardiac or cerebrovascular causes of death. And these cases were from a wide range of occupation and socioeconomic groups, including truck drivers, engineers, physicians, trainees, managers, professors, etc. So there have been a lot of controversies about worker compensation, whether you can recognize it as a work-related problem, and then the employer or the company or the labor insurance will have to compensate the family. So there's a lot of controversy how to determine the causality. Okay. And there are growing public concern and anxiety on work stress. Okay. So these are some photos taken last year on May 1st. So this was the first time that the professional workers came out on the street, protesting. And this is also the first time that the occupational health problems were the main thing. So usually workers campaign for they want to improve their wage, they want to secure their employment, but very infrequently health was the concern of the labor groups. So this is kind of unusual. Okay. So my studies have been focused on the occupational health system of Taiwan. So I've been studying I've been doing some international comparison in terms of the regulation. For example, the regulation on working hours, regulation on rest, and pay leave, etc. And also I'm studying the problem on inspection, labor inspection, and also the work health services and reporting system for occupational injuries and disease, and also worker compensation. So I've been very interested in policy aspect of health. So a lot of health problems can be solved or can be reduced. Some sufferings can be reduced by effective policies. So in terms of long working hours, Korea ranked as the #1 in the average working hours. And Taiwan used to be next to Korea, but recently working hours has been reduced. But in literature, if you do literature review, you will find that most of the studies come from the Western countries, which has much shorter working hours. So people in Western countries are less concerned about working hours, not like us, because they are and they are more concerned about other stressors in the workplace. Okay. So this is the slide made by one of my students, and she documented the changes in average working hours in different countries. We can see that 100 years ago, the Western countries, workers in Western countries also have very long working hours, but it has been declined very rapidly. These declines were due to the regulation of working hours. But in newly developed economies like Korea and Taiwan, we still have very high, very long working hours. Okay. So if we want to identify what are the major causes of the stress-related problem in the workplace, then we have to identify stressors. What are the major stressors in the environment? And there are many, including demands, job demands, and the control of the workers, social support, work reward, role conflict, etc. There are many things to study. But some researchers focus on the workers' behavior, like psychological personality or psychological attribute, or their coping behaviors. So some researchers will propose intervention policies targeting on individuals' behavior or individuals' personality or psychological features. Okay. And then, okay. So then I will introduce you a very influential model in this field, in the study of job stress problem. It's called the demand control model. This model was developed by two researchers. One is American, another one is Sweden. These models argue that alienation or lack of control is the main cause of job stress. And they argue that to prevent the stress problem at work, we will have to emphasize on job enrichment, democracy in workplace, and social support. And this model was the product of social democratic movement. And this is a product of political struggle to overcome powerlessness, de-skilling, and alienation. So I will explain briefly about the model. So in this model, it's argued that people who have the stress problem because they have high demand at work. Okay, so the x-axis shows that the degree of the psychological demands, and then this model argued that not only demand but also another important dimension is called the job control. They argue that the job control is probably more important than job demands. So what do we mean by job control? You can look at the, okay. So I will go back to the model later. So to measure job control, the researchers developed 6 items to measure the degree of skill, discretion. So for example, whether you can learn new things at work, whether your job requires repeated tasks, do you need to have the creativity at work, etc. And then there are 3 items to measure workers' power, decision authority, like whether you can make your own decision at work, whether you can decide what time you want to come into work and how you want to do your job. Can you do that? And decision freedom, lot of say. So there are 6 items to measure the skill level and 3 items to measure authority. So in total, there are 9 items for the measurement of job control. And for demands, there are 5 items for job demand. Whether you have to work very fast, do you have to work very hard, and there are a lot of excessive work? You don't have enough time, etc. Okay, so this model postulated that people will develop a lot of stress problems when you do not have enough power, control, and at the same time you are exposed to too much work. So heavy work, heavy demands. So what type of jobs belong to this category? And so because this model has been used in many countries and has been, so they have produced a lot of data for comparison. So this slide is the result from the survey conducted in the United States. So as I have mentioned before, the x-axis indicated the level of job demands. So to your right, you have higher job demands. To your left, you have less job demands. And the y-axis indicates the level of job control. So people who are at the upper range will have more power, more decision power. And people who have the lower end have the lower job control. So according to this model, people who belong to this quadrant on your right and down hand side, people in these groups will have a lot of stress problems. So what kind of occupation to belong to this group? Waiters and computer operator, and you can see a small dot here indicating assembler. So do you know in 2010 there are some workers in Foxconn company in China committed suicide? I think you must be aware of that, right? So that kind of jobs were a typical type of high-stress job. People in that kind of companies, they work very fast. They work with the machine. The pace is very quick, and the working hour is very long. So they have very high demand. And this kind of job workers at this kind of job have very low control, and there's no union. So they have no way to change the pattern of their work. And they have no way to express their opinion about how work should be arranged. So this is kind of a typical job of high-stress job. So this model has been quite successful in predicting poor health. So in many countries, this model has been applied in many countries, and a lot of data shows that people who had high demand and low control suffer the most in terms of the stress-related health problem. And who belong to this category, who has a high demand, but at the same time they also have high control, and what would happen to their health? So there's one small dot here. This is lawyer. Okay, this extreme outlier, lawyer. They have a high demand at work, and at the same time they have high control. So despite that, these workers may also have the problem of too much work, but because they have the high control, the stress from work become a nice thing. We call it eustress. The stress can stimulate people to work harder and work smarter or work more efficiently and gain mastery during the process. So these jobs are considered very challenging, demanding, but sometimes more meaningful, and people can improve their skill and they can gain mastery at work. But people at another kind of category who have the high demand, low control, they will be more like being suppressed, and they may suffer more from stress-related health problems. And there are two other quadrants. The upper left is called low-strength job. This kind of job, workers have the high control and low demand. So it sounds quite good, right? You do not have too many things to do, but at the same time you can say a lot. You have the high control. So, but unfortunately, these kind of jobs are disappearing. Okay. So, like a natural scientist and some repairman, etc. And there is another quadrant here. People here have low demand and low control. And what would happen to these people? What are the typical jobs of this category? So every day you come in to work and you have nothing to do, but you cannot change it. You can't change. You just sit there. And so what would you become if you have that kind of job? So according to this theory, and also have been shown by empirical data, people who have this kind of job tend to have the we call it social withdrawal. People will lose their social skill, and they will become less active. And you can imagine that if you were asked to sit there for 8 hours and 5 days a week and for the whole year, what would you become? You probably will become very quiet and less active, and probably become a little bit depressed. Okay. So it has been shown that people in this group, high-strength job, had a poor health. Okay, and this slide is the data from women. So you can see that the women's job tend to cluster in this high-strength category. Okay, so you can observe like many kind of work, like this one person standing on street. This is kind of a very inhumane job. It's nothing to do but stand there, and they usually receive very limited wage. Okay, so according to this theory, if we are exposed to active job, then workers will become the active person and will stimulate the active learning behavior. And for a long time, the people will gain a feeling of mastery. And if these workers are put into unfavorable work conditions, they will have the ability to change the environment, or to inhibit the feeling of stress. Okay. On the other hand, the people who have been exposed long-term in another type of job category, the high demand, low control job, then the accumulated strength will inhibit their learning behavior, even though they are put into a more stimulating environment. They will have problems adjusting themselves. Okay, so we also use these models in our Taiwanese data, and we found that our findings is inconsistent is consistent with the model, showing that the people who are in this category have poor health, poor mental health. Okay. So, and this model has been used for international comparison. So, the y-axis is indicated job demand, and x-axis, and y-axis indicated the level of job control, and you can see that Taiwan located in the high demand and low control category, and some Western countries we have data here. Okay, and we are also doing some international comparison in terms of the change, secular change, and in the EU. The EU surveys show that European workers have over the past 10 years, the level of job control has improved, and at the same time, the level of job demand also improved. In other words, European workers are moving toward the upper right hand, so moving toward active job categories, and same patterns was found in US. But in Taiwan, in summary, we are moving toward the high demand and low control category. So just to show you the pattern of the level of job control. So over the past 10 years, Taiwanese workers have experiencing declining level of job control. So that's something we have to be concerned. Okay. So what have we identified as a major social determinant for stress-related problem at work? We can look at the micro level social determinant, meso level, and the macro level. So micro level means that the social determinant at the task level, how the job was designed, and the characteristic of that job, whether the job has do not have enough benefit, or the workload is too heavy, and whether the type of job has a low security and do not have enough skill, too repetitive. So we can try to change the job design in order to avoid the problem of job stress. And also we can think of how to regulate the working hour, how to secure people's income, etc. But we can also look at the meso level, which means the organizational level. So how to avoid using too many flexible labels is something that we can think of in terms of policy intervention. And how to reduce competition at work is also the thing to consider. And for macro level, as you will soon see that there will be many march or protests on May 1st, and that is the emphasis, the example of emphasis on the macro level intervention. So how to change policy, how to improve the relationship between employer and the employee is something to do at the macro level. Okay, so this slide is adapted from the WHO document showing that the relationship between employment and health inequality, and this document pinpoints some intervention point for us to consider. So we can target on power relationship, we can target on policy level, employment level, working condition, and at the end to improve the health inequality problem. So this is just an example using job stress. Okay. So I had to talk about homework assignment, which is due next week, next Thursday. So, so please submit the one-page summary as a group, and then I will ask students to make a brief presentation next Friday at the beginning of the class. Okay. So any question now?